Admiral Nathan Price stood in the center of the Galactic Council chamber and felt the weight of 30 years pressing down on his shoulders. The massive hall stretched out before him like a cathedral built for gods, with floating platforms holding the representatives of 12 elder species who looked down at humanity with barely concealed contempt. The walls shimmered with energy, fields that translated thousands of languages simultaneously, and the air hummed with the power that had governed the galaxy for 10,000 years. Nathan had served Earth faithfully in this place, had bent his knee to these beings, had sacrificed his people's blood to maintain their peace. Today, everything would change. Commander Lisa Morgan stood beside him with her hands clasped behind her back and her jaw set in a hard line. She had spent 5 years as Earth's chief diplomat, trying to make these alien powers see humans as equals rather than useful servants. Her dark eyes scanned the assembled council members with the kind of cold assessment that came from too many betrayals. The Zelthari ambassador, a creature that looked like flowing water given form, raised what passed for its hand and the chamber fell silent. The accusation came swift and merciless. Earth had developed advanced weapons without council approval. Earth had expanded beyond its designated sectors. Earth had violated trade regulations by refusing to share technology with council oversight committees. Nathan listened to the charges with his face carved from stone. He had heard variations of these complaints for years, always the same underlying message that humanity had forgotten its place in the cosmic order. When the Zelthari finished, Lisa stepped forward to defend Earth's actions. She spoke clearly about the pirate raids that had devastated 3 human colonies in the past year alone. She presented evidence of 17 requests for council military assistance that had been ignored or delayed until the attacks were over and the colonists were dead. She reminded the chamber that council law promised protection to all member species, not just the elder races who had written those laws. The Quilnar delegate interrupted her with a sound like grinding stones. Its massive form shifted on its platform as it declared that younger species must learn patience and humility before demanding equal treatment. The other council members murmured their agreement, a chorus of dismissal that echoed through the chamber. Lisa tried to continue, but the Zelthari cut her off with a wave. The vote would proceed immediately. Sanctions against Earth, limits on expansion, surrender of the newest warships. The tally appeared in holographic form above the chamber floor, and Nathan watched each species cast its vote against humanity without hesitation. When the final count showed unanimous opposition, Nathan felt something break inside him that had been cracking for years. He thought about the Battle of Krynn, where human fleets had thrown themselves against an invasion force to save council worlds while these same ambassadors watched from safety. He thought about the 6,000 humans who had died in that battle, their names recorded on a memorial that no council member had ever visited. He thought about the colonies that Earth had built with sweat and hope, only to watch them burn while council ships stayed in dock. The anger rose in him like a tide, but when he spoke, his voice was calm and measured. Nathan walked to the center of the chamber floor where Earth's sigil had been embedded in the crystalline surface for 3 decades. He bent down and placed his hand on the symbol, feeling the cool material beneath his palm. With a sharp twist, the sigil came free. He held it up for all the council to see. The blue and green representation of Earth that had once meant humanity belonged to something greater. The chamber fell silent as every being present realized what was about to happen. Nathan spoke 5 words that would echo across the galaxy. Earth withdraws from the council. The declaration hung in the air like a physical thing. Lisa stepped forward and added that all human personnel, ships and assets would evacuate council space immediately. All treaties were void. All agreements were terminated. Earth would take responsibility for its own defense, its own trade, its own future. The Quilnar ambassador laughed, a sound like mountains crumbling. It said that humanity could not survive without council protection, that they would come crawling back within a year, begging for readmission. The other council members joined in the laughter, secure in their belief that the upstart humans had just signed their own death warrant. Nathan turned and walked toward the exit with Lisa beside him. Behind them, the council chamber erupted in voices as species debated what this meant for galactic stability. Some were concerned about the precedent. Others were already calculating how to divide Earth's former territories among themselves. None of them truly believed that humanity would go through with the withdrawal. They had spent 10,000 years as the unquestioned rulers of known space, and the idea that a species less than a century old in galactic politics would dare to leave was simply absurd. So, Admiral and the commander walked through corridors that had seen countless diplomatic victories and defeats. Human staff members fell in behind them as word spread through the station. Within an hour, every human on Viridian Prime was packing their belongings and heading for the docking bays. Captain Jake Sullivan received the evacuation order aboard the ECS Defiant and immediately began coordinating the withdrawal of human military vessels from Council space. His ship was patrolling near the border territories when the distress calls started coming in. 3 human colonies under attack: New Cambridge, Port Alexander, and Freedom Station. The Krill Raiders had chosen their moment perfectly, striking while Earth's relationship with the Council hung by a thread. Jake sent emergency requests for Council assistance as the old treaties required. His communications officer tried every channel, every frequency, every diplomatic contact they had built over 30 years. The response was silence. The Council stations that had always answered human calls suddenly had no ships available, no forces to spare, no interest in helping a species that had just rejected their authority. Jake made the decision that every human commander would face in the coming days. He took his battle group and jumped to New Cambridge, leaving Council space undefended for the first time in 3 decades. As the Defiant dropped out of faster-than-light travel, he saw the colony below wreathed in fire. Krill attack ships swarmed over the settlement like insects, their weapons tearing apart homes and shelters that families had built with their own hands. Jake gave the order to engage, and his ships dove into the fight with everything they had. The battle was desperate and costly, but they drove the raiders off and saved what remained of the colony. When the fighting ended, Jake stood on the bridge and looked at the casualty reports. 43 colonists dead, 2 human ships damaged, and the Council had not sent a single vessel to help. He filed his report with Earth Command and included a single recommendation. Humanity was truly alone now, and they needed to act accordingly. Admiral Nathan Price received that report in his quarters as his transport ship carried him back toward Earth. He read Jake's words and knew that the easy part was over. Leaving the Council had taken 5 minutes. Learning to survive without them would take everything humanity had. The exodus began 3 days after Admiral Nathan Price removed Earth's sigil from the Council chamber floor. Colonel Amy Foster watched from the command center on Luna Station as 6,000 human vessels prepared for the largest coordinated movement in galactic history. Every ship from military dreadnoughts to civilian cargo haulers received precise jump coordinates and timing windows. The operation required perfect synchronization across 17 sectors of Council space, and Amy had spent 72 hours without sleep making sure nothing would go wrong. Her team worked around the clock, verifying that every human citizen in Council territory had been accounted for and assigned to an evacuation vessel. On the colony world of New Haven, Karen Hughes stood in the doorway of her farmhouse and looked out over fields her grandfather had planted 40 years ago. The crops were almost ready for harvest, golden grain swaying in the afternoon breeze under an alien sun that had become as familiar as Earth's own. Her 2 children sat on the porch steps with tears running down their faces because they understood enough to know they were leaving forever. Karen's husband loaded their possessions into a transport truck, taking only what they could carry and leaving behind a lifetime of work. The evacuation ships would arrive in 6 hours, and every settler on New Haven had to be ready to leave. Karen walked through her house one final time, touching the walls her family had built with their own hands. She remembered her daughter's first steps in the kitchen and her son learning to read in the study. Every room held memories that no transport ship could carry. When the time came to board the evacuation shuttle, Karen took one last look at the farm and made a silent promise. Humanity would remember this betrayal, and one day they would make the Council understand what they had thrown away. The shuttle lifted off with 200 settlers, and below them the town of New Hope grew smaller until it disappeared into the landscape. Back in Council space, the effects of human withdrawal rippled outward like waves from a drop. Pedstone. The Vaxorn Confederation discovered the scope of their mistake when their quantum communication network failed on the same day human technicians departed. For 20 years, human engineers had maintained the relay stations that connected Vaxorn worlds across 3 sectors. The Vaxorn had grown dependent on that network for everything from government communications to commercial transactions. When it went dark, their entire economy began to collapse. Ambassador Kelrath sent urgent messages to Earth Command begging for the technicians to return, offering triple their previous salaries and formal apologies for past slights. Captain Helen Stone received those messages aboard the transport ship carrying the last human engineers out of Vaxorn space. She read Kelrath's increasingly desperate pleas and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Her sister had died on New Cambridge during a krill raid while Council ship sat in dock less than a day's travel away. Helen recorded a brief response to the Vaxorn ambassador. Earth no longer recognized Council authority or Council agreements. Humanity owed the Vaxorn nothing. The technicians would not be returning. She sent the message and deleted every subsequent communication from Kelrath without reading it. The medical crisis hit the Council even harder than the communication failures. Human researchers had developed cures for 3 major plagues that affected multiple Council species over the past decade. Those cures required ongoing production of specialized medicines that only human facilities could manufacture. When the human medical teams evacuated, they took their equipment and their knowledge with them. Within 2 weeks, plague outbreaks began appearing on Council worlds that had been disease-free for years. The Zelthari lost 10,000 citizens to a resurgence of crystal rot. The Quilnar watched helplessly as spore sickness spread through their colony worlds. The security situation deteriorated even faster than public health. Human warships had patrolled border zones and trade routes throughout Council space, providing a deterrent against piracy and aggression that the elder species had taken for granted. The Krill Dominion had been contained for decades by a combination of Council treaties and human military presence. Warlord Thraken the Merciless had watched human ships carefully, respecting their efficiency and firepower even as he plotted expansion. When those ships disappeared from the border zones, Thraken saw opportunity written in the empty space they left behind. The Krill invasion began with surgical strikes on 3 lightly defended Council worlds. Thraken's forces overwhelmed the local garrisons in days, and the Council's response revealed how much they had relied on human military support. The elder species had grown comfortable letting humanity handle the dangerous work of actual combat. Their own fleets were impressive in parades but unprepared for real war. The Council Military Command tried to organize a counteroffensive and discovered that their forces could not coordinate effectively without the tactical networks human officers had designed and maintained. On Earth, President Charles Bennett addressed humanity from the rebuilt United Nations complex in Geneva. The speech was broadcast to every human world and ship, reaching from Mars to the furthest colonies on the edge of explored space. Bennett spoke without notes, his words carrying the weight of a species that had been pushed too far. He declared that Earth would adopt a new policy built on isolation and self-reliance. Humanity would defend its own borders and forge its own path. They would never again bow to species that saw them as servants rather than equals. The speech resonated across all human worlds, igniting a fierce determination that burned through every settlement and station. Dr. Linda Ross stood beside President Bennett during that address, and when he finished speaking, she unveiled Project Exodus. The massive initiative would advance human technology in every field, without the restrictions that Council oversight had imposed. For 30 years, humanity had operated under technology-sharing agreements that required Earth to submit all innovations to Council review boards. Those boards had consistently blocked or delayed human advances that might threaten the technological superiority of elder species. Now those restrictions were gone and human ingenuity could finally operate without chains. The research began immediately. Across dozens of facilities on Earth and Luna, scientists who had spent careers working within narrow parameters suddenly found themselves free to explore radical concepts. Engineers who had been forced to use approved methods could now experiment with new approaches. The pace of innovation exploded as humanity poured resources into advancement. Military research received the largest funding, with new weapon systems and defensive technologies moving from concept to prototype in weeks rather than years. Admiral Nathan Price oversaw the military transformation from Earth Command headquarters. He coordinated with Colonel Amy Foster on the strategic positioning of returning human fleets. Every ship was assigned to patrol routes within Earth's territory, creating a defensive network that would make any invasion attempt costly beyond calculation. Nathan studied reports from Captain Jake Sullivan about the krill tactics used at New Cambridge and incorporated those lessons into new training programs. Human forces drilled constantly, preparing for the threats that would inevitably come. The Council emergency session 3 months after Earth's withdrawal descended into chaos that would have been unthinkable before. Ambassador Kelrath presented evidence that Vaxorn infrastructure was collapsing without human maintenance. The Quilnar delegate demanded they find a way to force Earth back into the Council. The Zelthari refused to admit their mistake, insisting that humanity would return on their own when they realized they needed Council protection. Arguments broke out between species that blamed each other for driving the humans away. The session ended without any decisions or solutions, just more anger and more fear. Meanwhile, Thraken pushed deeper into Council space with an army that met little effective resistance. His forces conquered world after world, and millions of Council citizens found themselves living under brutal Krill occupation. The warlord sent messages to the Council demanding they surrender entire sectors or watch more worlds burn. The elder species that had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years discovered they could not defend themselves without the warriors they had dismissed as primitive newcomers. Their pride had cost them everything, and the bill was coming due in blood and fire. Captain Helen Stone brought her ship into Earth orbit and looked down at the blue planet that had birthed humanity. She thought about her sister and all the other humans who had died waiting for Council help that never came. The anger still burned inside her, but now it was joined by something else. Hope. Earth was building something new, something stronger, something that would prove to the galaxy that humanity needed no one's permission to be great. 6 months had passed since Admiral Nathan Price walked out of the Council chamber, and the galaxy had transformed into something unrecognizable. Commander Greg Palmer stood in the construction bay above Earth and watched welding sparks dance across the hull of humanity's newest warship. 50 vessels like this one were taking shape in orbital facilities that ran 24 hours without pause. Each ship incorporated breakthrough technologies that would have been forbidden under Council law, and Greg had personally overseen the integration of weapon systems that made the old human fleet look like toys. The vessels were faster and more powerful than anything the elder species had ever built, and they represented just the beginning of what humanity could achieve when no one held them back. The Krill Dominion had not stopped its expansion. Warlord Thraken the Merciless now controlled 14 former Council worlds, and his forces pushed deeper into territory that had known peace for centuries. The Council's emergency sessions grew more desperate with each passing week, as species that had ruled for 10,000 years discovered they could not defend themselves. Their fleets engaged the Krill in battle after battle and lost every time, because the elder species had forgotten how to fight real wars. They had relied on human strength while pretending it was their own superiority that kept the peace. Now that strength was gone, and billions of Council citizens lived under occupation or fled as refugees, the Quilnar delegate stood before the remaining Council members and admitted what everyone already knew. They needed Earth. The words came hard because pride died slowly even when survival demanded it. The Zelthari ambassador argued against any outreach to humanity, saying it would show weakness that other species might exploit. Ambassador Kelrath of the Vaxorn cut through the debate with cold facts. Their infrastructure had collapsed. Their plague deaths had reached 500,000. Their military could not stop the Krill advance. Without human help, the Council would fall completely within a year. The chamber fell silent as the truth settled over them like a burial shroud. Meanwhile, humanity thrived in isolation in ways that shocked observers across the galaxy. Captain Nicole Bryant commanded a battle group patrolling the frontier near New Terra, when her sensors detected a pirate fleet moving to attack the colony. 23 ships crewed by species that believed Earth was vulnerable without Council protection. They had heard the propaganda about humans being weak newcomers who had only survived through elder species mercy. Nicole let them approach until they committed to the attack, then gave the order to engage. Her battle group moved with precision that came from constant drilling and new tactical systems that networked every ship into a unified force. The engagement lasted 17 minutes, from first contact to final pirate vessel destroyed. Nicole's ships used gravitational weapons that twisted space itself to crush enemy hulls. Energy shields absorbed pirate fire without strain. Advanced fighters launched from carrier bays and cut through enemy formations like blades through paper. Not a single human ship took serious damage. Not a single human life was lost. Nicole recorded the entire battle and transmitted it on open channels across the galaxy. The message was simple and clear. Humanity protects its own, and anyone who threatens human worlds will face consequences beyond their imagination. The footage spread through every species network and communication system. Pirates who had been planning raids on human colonies quietly abandoned those plans. Warlords who had seen Earth's withdrawal as opportunity reconsidered their calculations. Even the Krill studied the battle recordings with new respect for human capability. Captain Jake Sullivan watched the recordings from his posting at New Cambridge and felt grim satisfaction. The colony had been rebuilt stronger than before, and now the galaxy understood that attacking human settlements was suicide. The Council could delay no longer. Ambassador Kelrath volunteered to lead a delegation to Earth because the Vaxorn had lost the most and needed human help most desperately. The Quilner and Zelthari sent representatives as well, though their pride made every step toward Earth feel like walking to an execution. The delegation traveled in a Council diplomatic ship that had once carried ambassadors to meetings where they dictated terms to lesser species. Now they came as supplicants to a species they had dismissed as children. The irony was not lost on anyone involved. Earth Station 1 received the Council delegation with cold protocol. Commander Lisa Morgan met them in a conference room that had none of the grandeur of the Council chamber on Viridian Prime. The human diplomatic staff offered no refreshments and no small talk. When Ambassador Kelrath began his prepared speech about mutual cooperation and shared interests, Lisa cut him off. The Council had made their position clear 6 months ago. What did they want now? Kelrath laid out the situation with admirable honesty. The Krill had taken 14 worlds and showed no signs of stopping. Council infrastructure was failing without human maintenance. Plague deaths mounted daily. They needed human assistance, and they were willing to offer full reparations for past mistakes. Restored trade rights. Technology sharing agreements that favored Earth. A formal apology delivered before the entire Council assembly. Even full Council membership with veto power over any decision that affected humanity. The Vaxorn ambassador's voice shook as he listed concessions that would have been unthinkable 7 months ago. Lisa listened without expression until Kelrath finished. Then she stood and left the room. The Council delegation sat in confused silence for 20 minutes before Admiral Nathan Price and President Charles Bennett entered. Nathan carried himself with the bearing of a man who had sacrificed everything for people who never valued that sacrifice. Bennett's face showed no anger, just the cold assessment of a leader who had learned that some betrayals could never be forgiven. The President spoke first, and his words carried the weight of humanity's collective judgment. Earth would not return to the Council. Humanity would not send its ships to die defending species that had laughed at their pain. Human blood was not cheap, and it would not be spent protecting elder species who had proven they saw humans as disposable tools. Bennett outlined Earth's position with brutal clarity. Human borders were secure. Human colonies were defended. Human citizens were safe. That was all that mattered. The Council's problems were the Council's responsibility. The delegation could leave immediately, Ambassador Kelrath tried to argue. He spoke of the greater good and the responsibility that power brought. He reminded them that billions of innocent Council citizens suffered under Krill occupation. Surely humanity would not abandon those people to save their own pride. Nathan Price finally spoke, and his voice cut through Kelrath's pleading like a knife. Where was the Council when human colonies burned? Where was the greater good when Earth begged for help and received silence? Where was responsibility when human children died waiting for protection that Council law had promised? The Admiral's words hung in the air like an accusation that could never be answered. The Council delegation left Earth Station 1 without the help they had come seeking. Their ship departed human space and jumped toward the Council core worlds where the Zelthari homeworld was preparing for invasion. Thraken's forces had reached the sacred planet where the Council had been founded 10,000 years ago. The Zelthari government broadcast desperate pleas for assistance across all channels. Their defense fleets positioned themselves between the Krill Armada and their homeworld, knowing they were overmatched, but determined to fight anyway. They hoped the Council would rally to defend its birthplace. They hoped humanity might reconsider at the last moment. They hoped for a miracle that would never come. The battle for the Zelthari homeworld lasted 3 days. The defenders fought with courage that would have been admirable if it had been combined with competence. The Krill tore through their formations and bombarded the planet from orbit. Cities that had stood for millennia burned. Centers of culture and learning that had produced art and philosophy for countless generations were reduced to rubble. 5 billion Zelthari died in the invasion, and the survivors fled into space as refugees. The Council's founding species had fallen, and the galaxy watched in horror. Captain Helen Stone monitored the battle from her posting near the human border. Her crew wanted to intervene because watching genocide happen in real time tested every moral principle they held. Helen understood their feelings because she shared them. But she also remembered her sister's face and the faces of 6,000 other humans who had died defending Council worlds. The price of Council arrogance was being paid in full, and humanity would not interrupt that reckoning. The Zelthari homeworld fell, and human ships remained in their positions protecting human space. The universe had trembled when humanity left the Council. Now it would learn what happened when mercy was mistaken for weakness. The refugee crisis that followed the fall of the Zelthari homeworld tested humanity in ways that military conflict never could. Commander Sarah Blake stood on the bridge of her patrol ship near the New Haven system when her sensors detected the incoming vessels. 12,000 Vaxorn refugees packed into ships that were never meant to carry so many people. The vessels limped through space with failing life support and damaged engines. Desperate survivors fleeing the Krill advance with nowhere left to go. Sarah read the distress signals and felt her stomach twist because she knew what came next. The refugees were heading straight for human territory, and she needed orders from Earth Command about what to do with them. The debate on Earth cut through the political establishment like a blade. President Charles Bennett sat in the Situation Room with his advisors and listened to arguments that pulled him in opposite directions. Admiral Nathan Price laid out the military perspective with cold logic. Allowing refugees into human space created security risks and resource drains that Earth could not afford. The Vaxorn had stood with the Council when humanity was abandoned. They had voted for sanctions and laughed at human suffering. Why should Earth spend resources saving them now? The Admiral's words carried the weight of personal pain because he had lost friends in battles where Council help never arrived. Lieutenant Danny Ward spoke next, and his voice shook with emotion barely held in check. His family had lived on Port Alexander when the Krill attacked during Earth's withdrawal. His parents and younger brother had died in that raid while Council ships sat idle. Danny had joined the military specifically to make sure no one else lost family the way he had. The thought of helping Vaxorn refugees made him physically ill. They deserved exactly the mercy they had shown humanity, which meant none at all. Let them drift in space. Let them understand what abandonment felt like. Several other advisors nodded agreement because Danny's story was not unique. Too many humans carried similar scars. Dr. Linda Ross waited until the angry voices subsided before she spoke. The scientist had spent months developing the technologies that made Earth's new warships unstoppable, but her mind worked beyond weapons and shields. She reminded the president that humanity's strength had never come from matching the casual cruelty of elder species. Earth had survived because humans held principles even when holding them was costly. The Council had abandoned those principles, and look what happened to them. If humanity became as cold and merciless as the species that had rejected them, then the Council's judgment would be proven right. Earth would become just another empire that valued power over decency. The room fell silent as people absorbed her words. President Bennett looked at the sensor data showing G12,000 refugees running out of air and options. He thought about the human colonies that had burned while waiting for help. He thought about the 6,000 dead at Kryn whose sacrifice the Council had forgotten. He thought about what kind of civilization Earth wanted to build in its isolation. The decision took 20 minutes of internal struggle, but when he gave his orders, they were clear. Earth would provide humanitarian assistance to the refugees. Medical ships would treat the injured and sick. Supply vessels would provide food and water and repair materials. But humanity would not fight the Krill. Earth would not defend Council worlds or join any military operations. The refugees would be helped and then transported to neutral systems far from the conflict. Commander Sarah Blake received those orders and immediately mobilized the humanitarian response. Human medical ships arrived at the refugee fleet within 6 hours, and doctors began treating patients who had gone days without proper care. Engineers worked to repair damaged vessels and restore failing life support systems. Supply officers distributed food and clean water to people who had been rationing both for weeks. The Vaxorn refugees wept with gratitude and confusion because they could not understand why humanity would help after everything the Council had done. Sarah kept her responses professional and brief. Earth was offering mercy, not friendship. The distinction mattered. The humanitarian operation took 3 days and saved every refugee in the fleet. When the work was finished, human ships escorted the Vaxorn to a neutral system where other species had established temporary shelters. Sarah watched the refugees depart and felt complicated emotions she could not easily name. Pride that humanity had held to its principles, anger that the situation existed at all, satisfaction that the galaxy would see Earth could be both strong and merciful. The footage of human medical ships saving Council refugees spread across every network and communication system. The response was shock because no one had expected humanity to help the species that had betrayed them. Warlord Thraken the Merciless watched those broadcasts from his flagship and saw opportunity where others saw mercy. The Krill leader had built his empire through violence and intimidation, and he understood that strength without ruthlessness was weakness waiting to be exploited. Earth had proven it possessed devastating military power in the battle where Captain Nicole Bryant destroyed 23 pirate ships in 17 minutes. But the humanitarian response to Vaxorn refugees suggested humans were soft at their core. Thraken believed he could use that softness against them. He assembled the largest Krill war fleet in history, 3,000 ships drawn from every conquered system under his control. The target was Earth itself. Intelligence officer Captain Frank Morris detected the Krill fleet assembly through the network of sensor stations Earth had positioned throughout the border regions. He analyzed the gathering forces and ran probability calculations that all pointed to the same conclusion. Thraken was preparing an invasion of human space, and the target had to be Earth because nothing else would justify that many ships. Frank sent his report through emergency channels directly to Earth Command, and Admiral Nathan Price received it during a strategy meeting about defensive deployments. The Admiral read the intelligence assessment twice before he stood and addressed his command staff with the calm intensity that came before major military operations. President Bennett convened an emergency session with his military leadership within the hour. The Situation Room filled with officers who had spent the past months preparing for exactly this scenario. Admiral Price outlined the threat with brutal clarity. 3,000 Krill warships would reach human space in approximately 10 days. Their most likely objective was Earth itself, because Thraken wanted to prove that humanity could be conquered just like the Council species. A defensive strategy would mean fighting in orbit around Earth with civilian populations at risk. Price proposed an alternative called Operation Thunderclap. Instead of waiting for the Krill to reach human territory, Earth's fleet would intercept them at the edge of Council space in the ruins of the Zelthari system. The plan was aggressive and risky because it meant taking the fight into hostile territory far from support and supply lines. Commander Greg Palmer supported the strategy because the new warships were designed for exactly this kind of power projection. Captain Jake Sullivan pointed out that fighting in the Zelthari system would send a message to the entire galaxy. Humanity would not cower behind borders waiting for enemies to come to them. Earth would strike first and strike hard, demonstrating that the decision to abandon the Council had made humanity stronger rather than weaker. President Bennett listened to the arguments and made his decision. Operation Thunderclap was approved. Every available human warship would mobilize immediately. The call went out across all human military installations from Earth to the furthest colonies. 800 vessels received deployment orders and began the journey toward the Zelthari system. Crews that had drilled constantly for months felt the nervous energy that came before real combat. This would not be a patrol action or a quick skirmish with pirates. This was fleet engagement on a scale humanity had never attempted. Captain Helen Stone stood on the bridge of the ECS Retribution and addressed her crew with words that echoed through hundreds of ships across the fleet. They were not fighting for the Council or for elder species that had never valued human sacrifice. They fought to show the galaxy what happened when humanity was threatened. They fought to prove that Earth bowed to no one. The human fleet gathered at the staging point just inside the border between human and former Council space. Admiral Nathan Price reviewed the battle plan from his flagship and felt the weight of command pressing down harder than ever before. 800 ships and over 200,000 personnel depended on his decisions in the coming fight. Thraken's 3,000 vessels outnumbered humanity almost 4-1, but numbers had never told the whole story of human warfare. Price sent the order to jump, and the largest military force Earth had ever assembled disappeared into faster-than-light travel toward the Zelthari system. where the galaxy would learn whether humanity's isolation had been suicide or transformation. The Battle of Zelthari would be remembered for 1,000 years as the moment the galaxy's balance of power shifted forever. Captain Jake Sullivan brought his vanguard force out of faster-than-light travel first, and his sensors immediately painted the massive Krill armada waiting in the ruins of the Zelthari homeworld. 3,000 enemy vessels arranged in traditional formation patterns that had served the Krill well against Council forces. Thraken's flagship sat at the center of the fleet like a dark star, and Jake could imagine the warlord's confidence as he saw the human ships arrive. The Krill had crushed every opponent they faced for months. They expected this battle to be no different. Admiral Nathan Price watched the tactical display from his flagship as the rest of the human fleet emerged from jump space in perfect coordination. 800 ships took their positions with precision that came from constant drilling and quantum-linked communication networks that Dr. Linda Ross had developed specifically for fleet operations. Every vessel in the human force could share targeting data and coordinate movements in real time, turning 800 individual ships into a single unified weapon. The Krill had never faced anything like it, because Council species had never achieved that level of integration. Price opened a channel to all human ships and gave the order that would start the largest space battle in recent galactic history. All vessels were weapons-free. Show them what humanity had become. The engagement began with the Krill launching their traditional opening move, sending wave after wave of fighters to overwhelm enemy screens while capital ships maneuvered for optimal firing positions. Thousands of small craft poured toward the human fleet like a swarm of angry insects. Lieutenant Amy Chen led her fighter squadron to intercept, and within seconds the nature of this battle became clear to everyone watching. Human fighters moved with speed and agility that made Krill pilots look like they were flying through mud. Advanced targeting systems locked onto multiple enemies simultaneously. Energy weapons that operated on principles the Council had never understood burned through Krill shields like they were not there. Amy's squadron destroyed 50 enemy fighters in the first 3 minutes without taking a single loss. Commander Greg Palmer commanded a battle group of dreadnoughts on the human fleet's right flank, and he watched the Krill capital ships begin their approach with weapons charging. The enemy vessels were massive and intimidating, built to terrify opponents into submission before the first shot was fired. Greg gave the order to demonstrate humanity's newest weapon system. His ships activated gravitational projectors that twisted the fabric of space itself around their targets. Krill vessels found themselves caught in artificial gravity wells that crushed their hulls like paper. 12 enemy capital ships imploded in the span of 30 seconds, their crews dying before they understood what had killed them. The Krill formation wavered as commanders realized they were not fighting an opponent using familiar technology. This was something new and terrifying. Warlord Thraken watched from his flagship bridge as his forces encountered resistance unlike anything they had faced before. The humans were not simply defending themselves. They were hunting. Small human strike groups moved through the Krill formation with predatory efficiency, isolating enemy vessels and destroying them before support could arrive. The quantum-linked tactical network allowed every human ship to know where every other human ship was and what it was doing. They moved like a school of fish or a flock of birds, individual units acting in perfect harmony toward a common goal. Thraken ordered his forces to concentrate fire on individual human vessels, believing that overwhelming force would break through eventually. His ships obeyed, and energy weapons converged on a single human destroyer. Captain Helen Stone commanded that destroyer, and she watched her shield displays as Krill fire hammered against the defensive barriers. The shields held because they operated on principles that Dr. Ross had adapted from exotic physics research that Council oversight committees had banned as too dangerous. The energy simply dispersed across the shield surface without penetrating. Helen returned fire with weapons that punched through Krill armor like it was not there. 3 enemy cruisers exploded under her barrage, and her ship emerged from the concentrated attack without damage. The Krill commanders watching that exchange felt something they had not experienced in decades. Fear. The battle raged for 4 hours, and with each passing minute the outcome became more certain. Human ships used tactics that combined centuries of Earth's military history with technologies that pushed the boundaries of physics. They executed maneuvers that Council species had considered impossible. They coordinated across vast distances without the communication lag that plagued other fleets. Captain Jake Sullivan led his vanguard in a daring strike directly at Thraken's flagship, and 5 human dreadnoughts converged on the massive Krill command vessel with devastating precision. Their combined fire overwhelmed the flagship's defenses and crippled its main engines. Thraken's ship went dead in space, and the warlord who had terrorized the Council for months found himself helpless as human vessels surrounded him. Admiral Nathan Price opened a communication channel to Thraken's flagship and delivered a message that would be recorded and broadcast across every species network in the galaxy. Humanity had withdrawn from the Council because elder species treated them as servants. The Krill had attacked because they saw isolation as weakness. Both had been wrong. Earth would protect its interests with whatever force was necessary, and any species that threatened human worlds would face the same fate as the Krill Armada. Price gave Thraken exactly 60 seconds to order a full retreat or watch his flagship be destroyed. The warlord, who had never backed down from anyone in his life, looked at his tactical display showing 2,000 of his 3,000 ships already destroyed. He gave the order to retreat. The surviving Krill vessels fled the Zelthari system in complete disarray, their legend of invincibility shattered beyond repair. Commander Greg Palmer wanted to pursue and finish them, but Admiral Price ordered the fleet to hold position. The message had been delivered. Humanity had proven its strength beyond any doubt. The battle footage was already spreading across the galaxy through channels that Earth had opened specifically for this purpose. Every species in known space would watch human forces dismantle the Krill Armada. The Council would see what they had thrown away. Pirates and warlords would understand that human territory was forbidden ground. The galaxy's power structure had changed in the space of 4 hours. President Charles Bennett received Admiral Price's battle report in his office on Earth and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction before turning to the larger questions. Commander Lisa Morgan stood beside him with preliminary reports of galactic reaction to the battle. The response was exactly what they had hoped for. Shock and awe from species that had dismissed humanity as weak newcomers, desperate messages from Council remnants begging Earth to reconsider their withdrawal, formal apologies from the Quilnar delegate, who finally admitted that the Council had made a catastrophic mistake. Bennett read through the messages and made his decision about Earth's future relationship with the galaxy. President addressed the entire galaxy from the same podium where he had announced humanity's policy of isolation 8 months earlier. His words were broadcast on every channel and translated into every known language. Earth would not rejoin the Galactic Council because that institution had proven itself corrupt and ineffective. Instead, humanity proposed something new. The Terran Coalition would be open to any species willing to treat humans as equals. The terms were simple and non-negotiable. Mutual defense against external threats, fair trade with no species receiving preferential treatment, absolute respect for the sovereignty of all member species, no elder races dictating terms to younger ones, no permanent Security Council positions. Every member would have equal voice and equal vote. The galaxy could take it or leave it. The response came faster than anyone expected. Within a week, the Vaxorn Confederation applied for coalition membership. Ambassador Kelrath personally delivered their application and admitted that everything the Council had built was based on the arrogance of elder species who believed age granted wisdom. The Vaxorn had learned the cost of that arrogance. They wanted to be part of something better. The remnants of the Zelthari government followed with their own application. Even some species that had been Council members for millennia quietly reached out to Earth about joining the coalition. The old order was crumbling, and humanity stood at the center of what would replace it. Admiral Nathan Price found himself commanding not just Earth's forces, but a growing coalition military that included ships from a dozen species. He worked with former enemies to establish joint training programs and shared defensive strategies. The relationships were awkward at first because trust had to be rebuilt from nothing. But slowly the coalition forces began to function as a unified military. Captain Helen Stone led mixed-species battle groups to liberate Council worlds still under Krill occupation. The operations were successful because coalition forces fought with the coordination and technology that humanity brought to the table. Freed populations watched human ships in their skies and understood that the galaxy had changed. Karen Hughes returned to New Haven with her family as part of the first wave of resettlement. Coalition ships from 4 different species patrolled the system now, protecting the colony that the Council had abandoned. Her children planted seeds in the same fields their grandfather had worked, growing food that would feed both humans and their new allies. Karen stood in her rebuilt farmhouse and looked out over the farm that had almost been lost. The betrayal still hurt, but something new was growing alongside the crops. Hope that humanity had built something better than what came before. Dr. Linda Ross unveiled humanity's next great project in a presentation that was watched by billions across Coalition space. Deep space exploration beyond the known galaxy. Humanity would continue to expand and innovate, pushing boundaries that elder species had accepted as permanent limits. The Coalition would grow with them, and together they would discover what lay beyond the edges of mapped space. The announcement captured imaginations across dozens of species because it spoke to possibilities rather than limitations. This was what the galaxy could achieve when cooperation replaced domination. The final image that defined the new era came from Viridian Prime, where the old council chamber sat abandoned and dark. Outside its windows, Coalition ships passed in formations that mixed human vessels with ships from former council species. They flew together under a new banner that showed Earth's blue and green alongside the symbols of their allies. The chamber where humanity had been dismissed now stood as a monument to the cost of arrogance. The universe had trembled when humans left, and now it would transform under their leadership into something no one had imagined possible.